All right, we're live on Facebook and YouTube. This is our Thursday Bible study. We're going to be zooming into the end part of confession, and then we'll be looking at the Lord's Supper. But I'm going to go ahead and take a moment and summarize Sunday afternoon's meeting and maybe kind of clarify a few points, just because I think we need to do that. So come on in.
Thank you. Good timing.
Good, because I'm going to summarize the afternoon meeting. So, and I'm going to be meeting with the governing board tonight, but I wanted to show. Let me make this bigger here. Let me do big picture of my brain. So, okay, where am I writing? Okay, here we go. So there's really, when it comes to where do pastors come from, and keep in mind we're a Missouri Synod Church. So you may not have had that experience if you're coming from somewhere else. Well, there's what they call the traditional route, and the traditional route includes more than one way in. And the traditional route always results in a MDiv, which is a Master's of Divinity. Okay. It's really a kind of a bachelor's degree more than it is a master's degree as you would get in other, if you were a teacher and then you master in something. It's really, because you can have a bachelor's degree in anything and go to seminary, right? But you have to have a bachelor's degree. All right, so this can happen a number of ways. A young person goes through high school, college, and then enters the seminary and becomes a pastor around the age 27 years old. In other words, he begins his career that way. So he just goes through the education system and begins his work at around the age 27 with a Master of Divinity and a bachelor in something. Okay? It is possible in the traditional route that somebody has done an entirely different career and then later goes to seminary. They also graduate with an MDiv, but they're no longer 27 years old, and they have lots of experience from other careers. This is still considered the traditional route because despite the age and experience of the person, we're still basing this on the Master of Divinity training. Okay? It is, and then also the seminary works this way. You have 2 years of books, and then you go out 1 year vicarage, and then you come back for 1 more year of books. I know you can't read that or you can't see that yet. So, but for instance, I did 2 years, but because I went to a foreign vicarage, I did 2 years in that vicarage.
What vicarage? I don't know.
Vicarage means you study beneath another pastor on site. So you do pastoral things in a limited fashion with a mentor. And we call that a vicarage. And so I did 2 years because I had to learn Spanish, and then I had to complete a year of vicarage underneath a pastor, which is basically 2 years, and then go back for 1 year. So my seminary experience was 5 years, but it's still traditional despite the fact that it had unique elements. It matches this. I only graduated with an MDiv and got to see a little bit of the world in the process. Okay? Then they created this thing called where you could do all 3 years of books, then go out on vicarage in a special circumstance or a church that this would match, and then you would stay after that year of vicarage, and they would ordain you as their pastor.
What are the books? Is it like different languages or just
no books? Meaning academic.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean academic's probably the better word. But you know me, I like to say things in a weird way. So in
that case, the vicar actually just moves right into the pastoral spot.
That vicar would move into the pastoral spot, whereas all the other vicars are going. They finish their vicarage, 4th year of seminary, academic work. They receive their calls next Tuesday. And by the way, I'm going. So I'm driving to St. Louis on Monday morning. I'll pick my dad up in Indianapolis, and then I'll keep going because my cousin Aaron Levenhagen, who participated in my 25th anniversary, he'll receive his first call on Tuesday night next week. So they basically announce your name and where you're going to be now going.
Do they decide where you're going?
Yeah, it's a complex process.
Yeah.
But there is a complex process, but it is a little bit mysterious. The guys that were interviewed by larger churches have a general idea where they're going. Missionaries know where they're going because they had to pass certain other. And
Will that be online, Pastor?
it will.
Because I know when Sam was,
Yeah.
that was online.
So the vicars go out, they get their assignments at 3, and then the calls go out at 7.
It's interesting in England, the term vicar
Yeah,
is completely different to
Right.
here. The vicar in England is doing what you're doing, basically.
Yeah, Pastor.
yeah, that's what I mentioned that, like, I know we're using the words differently, but the traditional route, you just need to know that this person is academically trained with a master's in divinity. And so, by the way, the training all occurs outside of the parish they're going to. They're just using those skills, honing those skills, failing at those skills, learning from those skills. So you go into the university of messing up, and then you continue to grow the rest of your life. So that's the traditional route. Now, all of a sudden, certain things started to crop up out of needs cropped up over time called alternate routes. So what do we do with somebody that has pastoral abilities but does not have a bachelor's degree? Can they go to seminary and get a call to be a pastor? Right. And so they had this one called the Distance Education something program, Delta, learning towards ordination. And that one was in Ohio big time. That's now been replaced with something called SMP, Specialized Ministry Program, meaning that the church that this person will serve in does not have the ability to go the traditional route, either financially or for whatever reasons. But then they create a position for this person and then still entrust the seminary to educate this person, occasionally on site at the seminary, and then mostly online, right? Which nowadays is quite easy. They do, it's Missouri, if it's Missouri Synod, it's going to be academic. Trust me. It's Missouri Synod people, they love education. I mean, I was just keeping my head above water barely the whole time I was in that system. I mean, it's very, very demanding. And there, you can't go to your professor, well, I don't think I need to know this. And you're done, right? And I don't think the church needs you. And and it's very rigorous. But now they're allowing people to train at home and stay local and not become residents. Because it's hard to relocate to the seminary for 2 years, relocate again for vicarage, relocate back to seminary. If you're a single guy, that was no problem. It was actually kind of fun, right? Because you're just like a perpetual college kid. But a lot of the seminarians that go in later in life or who have families early on, this is quite an expense. And it's disruptive, especially if they have children in school. But this one, the church would have to come up with a job description. What will this person do? Justify why we're not going this traditional route. Could be money or other things like that. And then this person becomes a vicar day one. Day one, they're the vicar. Not your vicar, our version of vicar. After 2 years, so it's a 4-year program. So first 2 years, they're a vicar, and then they get ordained here. They are not MDiv pastors, they're certified. Okay, so they're certified for pastoral ministry. This person, even when ordained, is locked geographically to this congregation only. They cannot go to a neighboring church. They cannot receive a call from another church. That can happen after a certain amount of time. And I don't know all the rules for that. And I do believe they've changed over time. So I'm not even going to get into that. But There are guys that have become certified pastors who eventually do take calls to other places after they fulfill a certain time and expectation. Many of these guys are quite successful, despite the fact that they haven't had all the formal training. That a lot of them do really well. I've also seen nightmares, right? And usually, I remember one time I met a guy and he laughed. He said, "Ha ha, you had to go to seminary and I didn't." And I was like, "Ha ha, it shows you didn't," right? Because you're not humble at all about it. And all you can go to seminary and never learn a thing afterwards, which is sad, or you can not go to seminary and become a learner your whole life long. And that's the goal anyway. It's to get the person enough gifts and skills that they can function as a learner in ministry, because the society and the church is always experiencing change, right? Unless you're just going to be a museum pastor, which a curator, and talk about, how to keep things exactly the same, which none of us have a choice to really do that. The world's too topsy-turvy. So this is an example of a specialized ministry program, and these people can do various different jobs. So I think what the church will be voting on, and I'm going to talk to the governing board, really is, do we want traditional or do we want alternate? So are we open as a congregation to explore some of these other options? I think that's what we're being asked. Because if we do this, then the congregation's number one job is to give more money. I mean, that's the only way to do this. The only way to do this in a godly way, because the worker is worthy of his wages. You don't call a worker if you can't pay him his wages. Yeah. Yeah.
If you went the alternative route, are they able to hold a full-time job as well?
Yes. Yeah.
So how would they do that?
So a lot of SMP people function as worker priests, I think is the term that they use, meaning that they do maintain a full-time job. They go to school and then they have certain roles in the church or ministries that they may manage or whatnot. And keep in mind, they don't really begin preaching until the second year.
So I'm talking about once they actually are finished.
It depends. It depends on the need of it. That would be determined by the church itself,
I just am questioning how someone can hold a full-time job and then be effective. I'm not saying because I don't know, I'm naive about this, but that's why I'm asking.
This is why that would be the function of the specialized, meaning they're not functioning as the pastor of the congregation. There is one. So that would be me. Right. This person would be specialized, meaning they would be focused on certain areas of ministry.
Like maybe
chosen by
pastoral care outside.
Well, no, we would do this together. Like right now, we've identified this person as working with youth.
I mean, you choose what this person does, not who he is.
No, we do that together as a church. So, we would determine what it is the church is trying to do, where we think the weaknesses or areas of attention need to be. And then we match that up with the gifts and skills. So if you have an SMP, somebody like Bob goes, "I want to be a pastor." And I go, "What do you love doing?" And he goes, "Well, I love finances." Well, we don't need that or whatever, right? We might say that. That's great. So could you volunteer and help out in our financial ministry? But we probably wouldn't do it. But this person would be specialized and limited in their role. But the neat thing about it is this person, let's say that Lent or I'm going on vacation, or once a month, the person begins to preach. Well, that frees up quite a bit of time, right? They would also be able to, on the days the pastor isn't working, take care of hospital visits and other visitation needs. They can do that out of the box. But that would be like me communicating with that person. "Hey, somebody went to the hospital. I'm off today, or I'm out of town, so I need you to cover that for me." Or you're going to preach once a month, and then during Lent, you're going to preach half of the Wednesday nights or something like that. And they're going to have to develop their skills. They're going to have less skills out of the box than these people are.
I see the skills. I'm still curious how if you have a full-time job, how you would be flexible enough to be able to do, I'm
Yeah.
not criticizing, just saying.
Yeah.
How can you be flexible enough with a full-time job that if you needed them and you're out of town?
You're not going to get them. They're not going to be able to do that. That's exactly why the worker priest model has a lot of weaknesses. And we've seen this around in our communities where a church couldn't afford a pastor, so they get a licensed deacon, which is another version of this that they did away with in the Missouri Synod. We had it up until the last convention. And then they realized that these people were functioning as pastors, weren't trained as pastors, and really weren't able to do the job, as they weren't replacing a pastor. They would just come in and do a sermon on Sunday. So the congregation had a preacher on a Sunday morning, but absolutely no pastoral care outside of that. And then they were like, that's not what we really thought this should be. Yeah, so.
A couple of us on a call committee the other day was talking. Well, that really, from our standpoint, was not talked to the congregation. What this function is, the SPL.
Well, the problem was
So
there's no reason to even talk about this unless there's somebody in your church that may be able to do this. And that's why it came up out of the blue. This is only an option if the person exists.
I understand that.
So that's why it was never talked about.
But we should have talked to the congregation. That is one option. And then let them say, oh, we got Joe Smith. He would really like it.
Right. And so this is why we mentioned it for the first time on Sunday morning. That's why the president talked about S&P on Sunday afternoon. And
did everybody in here really get a full view of what that was?
I thought it was pretty.
Yeah,
I
I
didn't-
thought it was pretty.
Yeah.
The only part that I'm still struggling with is that.
well,
on
the
one hand-
logistics of how does
Well,
it really work?
You said that they would be able to hold a full-time job. And then my question was how, if you have a full-time job, you would be flexible enough to meet your needs.
Mhm.
That was my only question, because it just doesn't, I've worked full-time my whole life, and
Yeah.
of course I was a nurse in a hospital, a little different. But you just don't say, oh,
Yeah.
I know I'm scheduled to work, but I have my other job I have to go to.
Yeah, and that would be something you have to be mindful of. If you have a worker priest, a lot of pastors tell me that when they got interviewed by a church, they would ask, what do you expect of your pastor? And they would often list it out. I want my pastor to answer my phone calls, visit me at home, visit me in the hospital. Oh, when you're in the hospital, how many times does he visit? Every day he visits when I'm in the hospital. Or, and then they list it all out. He's going to teach Sunday school. He's going to run Vacation Bible School. He's going to do all of this. And then the pastor lists it all out. And then he asks the congregation, well, how much time do you think the pastor's going to put in? And he tries to show the congregation, so your expectation is 80 to 90 hours a week. And so, well, that's not humanly possible. Wouldn't that be great? Right? You need to get me a cape, right? So that I can fly around and wear my underwear on the outside of my pants, right? I mean, nobody can do that. And so it shows the unrealistic expectations that can sometimes go along. The pastor is there in cases of emergency at any time, right? There are certain times where he may not be able to do that, but it doesn't mean he's omnipresent. That only the Lord can do. Only the Lord can be omnipresent.
Well, it did sound like those who are coming down the traditional method that we have about half the pastors that they need. So that makes it really hard for a church who really wants to go that route. Because it sounded like, okay, we had over 100 need and we've only got 60 pastors coming out or whatever, So obviously a lot of churches aren't going to be able to go that route right away.
Right, and this is what's forcing S&P.
Yeah.
There was no need for S&P in the olden days when you had seminaries jam-packed with men.
Yeah.
But now that there's not that case, or what we're seeing, what's causing this is more financial too.
Yeah.
Churches can't afford to expand their staff. So somebody told me the other day, the hardest transition in a church is from 1 to 2. From 2 to 4 and 5 and 6 is easy, but it's to get to that second pastor, that's the hard way. And because churches are functioning with the same expectations of ministry, but with less money, it's getting harder and harder. Yeah.
Can I? Oh,
Yeah,
I
hold
wanted to
on.
address Mary.
No, no.
When you were gone before, and we would have this fella that came from Royal Redeemer.
Yeah.
He went through the SMP
Right.
program.
Well, he was actually Delto first.
Uh-huh.
And so he was trained a long time ago. So that he's a unique one in that he was in this like unique program that was happening in Ohio. And I think David Lukey was one of the drivers of that, if you know who Pastor Lukey is, of Royal Redeemer. And so, and then they were able to convert or move him into SMP, the specialized ministry program, and then into full ordination. So yeah, Mark Ryan has completed the program. Right now
he's ordained as a pastor.
Correct. Certified.
Not
MDiv.
Not, okay.
But he can do everything a pastor can do.
Mm-hmm.
Grace Oberlin currently is in the process of integrating their their only pastor will be SMP, supervised by the pastor in Elyria, their English district. So there's an example in Ohio district where we have SMP actually functioning all by himself as the sole pastor of a church. Well, that's quite interesting. His other job, though, is he's a chaplain for the Lorain County prison system. So he is doing ministry in and out, but that congregation's dwindled down so small, there's no way back. So this is why I always say to a congregation, you know, you may be able to make ends meet now, and you might be content with that, but you got to be above that. You've got to have energy above it and money above it, because if you hit a bump in the road and you go down, it's just like your health. You're never going back to where you were, you know, and so you've got to maintain a higher level of energy and ministry above what you got in case you hit a snag or a bump or a financial trouble, because it's hard to bounce back. And a lot of these congregations have done ministry really well and they are declining, but they don't address the decline. And then all of a sudden their pastor takes a call and they're stuck in that situation. We really can't afford a pastor. So what they do is they get with another church that can't afford a pastor. So you have two struggling churches and put them together, and what do you expect to happen? They don't grow typically. I'm not saying that they're bad churches or anything, but if you put weak and weak together, what do you expect to get? Strong? That's not how it works, right? So you know, this is why the Ohio district is working with Bill Woolsey, no relation to me, but same exact last name, and he has a ministry that they're talking about networking churches together in the future. So putting strong churches with churches that are almost strong, right? So, and they're going to talk about that. There's a conference coming up that you guys would be welcome to attend, anybody that would want to go to that. I'm trying to get church leaders to go. I'll talk to the governing board about it tonight. But, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to address, Mary, that's a very good point you made about the low volume of, okay. But what I'm wondering is, would you be able to be on the call list with seminary at the same time that you're considering people who may go through the alternate program? Second, my feeling is that even though we don't have as many people to choose from, isn't it all meant to be what the Lord wants? So whether they want to come here or not, if they're really doing it, am I wrong on this?
Well, it's yeah, as a pastor, it's quite complicated. Okay. You know, and it may look like the pastor's making a psychological decision or a selfish decision, but but even God's at work in that. I mean,
I agree.
So I mean, a church calls you and you're able to, you have a large family, and the church is not going to pay you enough to support your family. You might say, well, Lord, is that a sign that I shouldn't go there?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Well, I'm going to go with that, other than become the next martyr in a church that doesn't.
I think you misunderstood what I'm saying, though, because maybe I put it wrong. But why would we just say, oh, we're not going to get a pastor, other churches get a pastor, but nobody's going to come here, and not try?
Right.
If
So
you can do both.
Right.
the only thing that changes this direction is if we cannot fulfill the responsibility that it brings. That's the only thing that's changing that. I think you always, why wouldn't you want the fully trained and capable person? I mean, that makes sense to me. But it's just like the metaphor is a little weak. But if you can't afford to drive it, don't buy it.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty much. Pretty much.
So one of the problems you got with that is that some people don't, some that are associate pastors at another church, and if they're on our call list, when we approach them and talk to them, they might have everything that we want, okay? But why should I come here as another associate when I've been there for X number of years?
Yeah.
And so they're going to decline because of that.
That's why you go to the seminary, because
Well,
they don't
I
have
understand that. We can't,
This seminary class is small. The next
Right.
one coming up, because they already know, is big. So it goes up and down.
There you
But and then we're also seeing churches where they're very protective of not putting the young guys that are coming out of school in a situation in which it ends their ministry. Because some congregations are a tough, they go in and they fill out their paperwork like, oh, you're going to love it here. We're going to pay you this salary. And what they don't say is we can only afford to pay you that salary 1 year unless the church grows. You're the stranger, you're walked in, and it's now your job to make that church grow, even though none of the people in that church figure it out. But now it's your responsibility. And if you don't, you're not going to have enough money to live on because we're going to have to let you go. And so the seminaries are really trying, the congregations have to be very transparent and honest about what they can do. This is where we're basically probably in some ways obligated to say that our giving does not sustain a second worker. You would be living off our savings. Now, I don't know about you, but if a church told me that, I'd say, I'd be a little nervous about that, unless you could show me that there is opportunity and you're fairly confident that reality, having a second worker, is really going to expand and grow ministry. You might be willing to take a chance.
Where does some of the ELCA's pastors that are converting to Lutheran, Missouri Center, where do they fit it?
That's the next one I was going to talk about.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So there's another dynamic that's happening. Yeah.
So the SMP, he may or may not be a member of this congregation now.
No, he would be a member.
He
of the
would be,
congregation.
okay.
Yeah.
Would he get a part-time salary?
Not
Or is
necessarily.
he's being educated? It's kind of like he's going to school.
I mean, it could be anything like the congregation could cover the education itself. It's $10,000 a year. It's pretty cheap comparatively. Or they may pay the person a stipend and they're responsible for their education. That's between the congregation. If we went that route, then we've got to do all that hard work to do. But the person is raised up from the local congregation to work in that congregation. So they're often known by the congregation. It is possible to get an S&P from somewhere else because something broke or something fell apart. The third option, which is MDiv but not traditional, is colloquy. Colloquy is where a person comes from another denomination. A Roman Catholic priest leaves Roman Catholicism, becomes a Missouri Synod pastor. So that is a pretty good transition because the academic requirements are very similar. So priests and pastors in the Missouri Synod are similarly trained. So colloquy basically says, well, you need to make sure the nuances of Lutheran doctrine are learned. So you need to take Lutheran Confessions, Lutheran Doctrine 1 or 2. I'm making this up, right? But you would have to show proficiency in understanding the Lutheran perspective. And colloquy would happen between other denominations too, but it is very individual, and the seminary decides what that person needs to do to be rostered or to be brought under and be qualified for a call. So like, for instance, in our area, there's two that have recently left the ELCA and have become Missouri Synod pastors. It happens the other way too. And then there's another one from the United Methodist Church that's about to begin the process, meaning They have this extensive paperwork they have to fill out, telling the seminaries why they desire to become a Lutheran Missouri Synod pastor, and then they go and interview in person. From that interview, the seminary then shows the plan forward that person has to comply with. Right.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
That's great, because that answered like 3 of my questions.
Yeah.
But I'm concerned if it's a pastor from a very liberal ELCA, how do you deprogram them?
Well, by the fact that they're colloquizing, they're already deprogrammed.
Well, they must have philosophies about things.
Right, and that's the seminary's job, is to go in and make sure during the interview that this person is safe.
Malleable.
A few months ago,
Safe.
A few months ago, we had
Yeah.
a gentleman in here, I think he was from West Virginia, and he was an ELCA pastor. And he
No.
said,
No, he was
Baptist.
Southern
Yeah,
Baptist.
he was
Southern
Baptist.
Baptist, okay.
Yeah.
But he said, I can't do that teaching anymore. So he's already,
Yeah,
programmed.
that's what I'm saying. We want to make
Yeah.
sure that we have somebody.
Right, and
who
the
doesn't have to be
seminary-
philosophical.
The seminary has been, we're a congregational church. So if I decided to ordain Julian today, the Missouri Synod really couldn't do much about it. They could fuss about it, but they can't stop it per se. They don't have like a police
I'm not a
force,
citizen, I'm just a
right?
resident.
So we could do anything we want, but as a congregation, we made a commitment as a denomination to walk together. That's the word synod, comes from 2 Greek words, syn, hodos, which means to walk together. So when we walked together as the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, we said we are going to delegate the criteria for pastors to synod and its seminaries. So therefore, we're not going to certify or put into ministry someone that doesn't meet those criteria. But guess what? They do. And it has happened, right? And so people have ended up in ministry. And so because we've made that commitment, we've delegated it's not ours, even though we're congregational, we're going to follow the rules to the best of our ability. Right now, I think what I was kind of chirping about, and why I think we needed to have this meeting, was we haven't really done, when we were going to build a building, we said we're going to need money to do this. And so we asked the congregation for money, and the congregation responded. We got the worker, and we didn't do that, and we didn't get it. So that's something we need to do. I'm not saying right now what I think I know which one's easier and harder in one way or another. What's harder when you get somebody out of seminary is they're coming with preconceptions about what church life is and expectations, whereas the person in your congregation already knows what it's like to be a part of the church, right? So you're dealing with somebody's expectation versus this person already knows in a way what to expect because they're of us. They're already from us.
They may expect something
Yeah.
different though.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the question I had. If I were, let's say I was a candidate, interested in the church, I would want to know where was that church 10 years ago? Where is it changed in the last 5? What's the future of the church? What does the congregation want? What does the current pastor want? What are the plans?
And that's all in the
And
documents. That's what we gave the call committee to do. The call committee has all that information.
Pastor, they have history as well as they know what the church is asking for me to do to make sure that I know I can meet those expectations.
Well, and what's interesting is sometimes the churches are giving less of a job description and more of a dream. Right.
Yes, so that's true.
And it's kind of like, well, yes.
But reality and what you want to see.
We want to be a big church again. Well,
sure.
You're in a town of 500 people, so you're probably not going to be a mega church.
Or an inner city church, which a lot of them are dying, because people don't live there anymore.
Well, not only that, is the inner city churches that have big properties, big buildings, all their money goes to maintenance. Yeah.
Just an observation, and with, in my occupation, I've seen people with MDiv, masters, and PhDs, not worth anything, And then someone hasn't even finished their bachelor's degree that's teaching, is gifted. Bingo.
This is the great intelligence that I think you have to do. And that is the fact that I personally believe, and I can't prove this, I put my diplomas up on the wall because my wife found them in the basement. They were moldy from being down there. I never framed them, never put them on a wall. They've always just been in a box. She decided to do that as a surprise for our 23rd wedding anniversary for me as a gift. And so I put them up in my office for the first time. And but I also recognize that in some ways I was a student, and I know this was true, that they were like, academically, this isn't really working. So we've got a person here academically underperforming. So the seminary apparently had a meeting, and I heard this after I graduated, and they said, well, do we think he can do the job of a pastor? He's not really academically strong, but could he do that job? And they were unanimous in that. So they pushed me through. Okay. Though my papers and my footnotes and all that were screaming, this person should not get a good grade. But did that mean they couldn't be a good pastor? And they were able to discern in the seminaries, just because we got an academic superstar, he's going to go in and wreck that first church because he doesn't do people. You got to be able to do people. You got to be able to step into the history, right? I always say that when a new pastor comes, they always tell you history begins right now. Well, no, that only happened when Jesus said it is finished and wait for power from on high. And now it's a new beginning. When that pastor gets here, he joins a story. And that story that's being told may or may not even be accurate. But trust me, he's got to deal with the story because he's a part of it now. When you get into the lazy river, whatever was floating before you got there is still floating in there now. And you've got to deal with it.
You'll probably find some of your, I wouldn't say better pastors, but ones that know how to deal with individual members of the church are ones who come from a smaller church first.
But
because they have, because being a smaller, they are the pastor, and they have to do all kinds of things with the individuals, like going to the hospitals and nursing.
Well, there are pastors in ministry who have autism and are really not good people, but they function. They write fantastic sermons, and they do other jobs in the church. So it's kind of interesting. Not every pastor is going to be successful everywhere and in every role. Yeah. It's just like in your world, if you promote a person beyond their ability, they don't rise to the occasion. They fail at it, right? I mean, at some point, not everybody's qualified to do everything. And you got to be smart enough at some point, and it takes most of a career to realize, I don't want that job because I wouldn't be good at it. And so you could get a pastor that's bad, not really that personable, not likable, maybe not even super friendly. That guy is a rock star as an administrative pastor and as managing staff and all those other things. You couldn't get a better pastor to do that. Now you stick him in a small church, in a small town, and they're like, what's wrong with him? Yeah. Right? Where's the spaceship parked? This guy's not even from Earth, right? And it can vary. So this is where we need the person matters, right? And this is why in the interview process, you really kind of get into who you are as a person too. Mm-hmm. What are your hopes and dreams? Oh, sure. What do you want from ministry? And
what called you to ministry? If you get someone who has a true calling, then if you can discern that, I think that would be a candidate no matter what. But, just working in a hospital situation, there were nurses who had a calling. Nurses, if they, hey, this is good, I have benefits, good pay, So in anything, I think when you see a person has a calling.
If you have a person that's in here, and doing things for the church, they're getting a good feel for this church, the people and everything. And that makes it seems like if they're inclined to go on and do this program, they would be ideal.
Yeah. And what you have to understand is none of them come with 100% certainty any more than any human being does. Just because you go the traditional route doesn't mean you're going to have success. Just because you go this route because it's financially easier doesn't mean it's going to lead to accomplishing what the church needs.
I'm not criticizing that.
Yeah.
I hope you understand. I'm not criticizing that. I'm saying that if you can make a plan, you have a candidate for the alternate. If you can also put in for the next call, you may be able to get the pastor and it'll work out, but you have somebody who can step in. I'm not saying you lead somebody down a primrose path, but if you've got this opportunity to make a call, and you said it's a bigger class, and the congregation works hard and tries to get to the point where you have the money for it, why would you go alternate if you could have another pastor? And I don't put it down at all. I'm just saying.
You know who's watching this is Tony Romano that came, that visited from you. So so all I'm saying is, even though I don't know how to communicate to the congregation. I've been the pastor for almost 17 years, and I always think I communicate, and then people are always still confused. And I just think it's like communication must be always, right? It's like a marriage. Like, well, I communicated with you in 1974, right? No, I mean, communicate, what are we doing today, right? I told you yesterday what we're doing today, but I slept since then. And I think, and it's interesting, and the preaching and the church service can't be replaced with that communication, right? It doesn't mean, well, I'm no longer going to preach Jesus. I'm going to tell you what in the world's coming down the line. You don't need a State of the Union every sermon. We still need to preach the gospel, but the congregation needs to know these other things. So traditional route, S&P, colloquy. It almost sounds like a poem. Those are the three main pieces that they talked about yesterday, or Sunday, but because of time restrictions, we can't talk about them. So in the olden days, you remember when I did this class, I always set aside this class as like a focus group where I would pitch out ideas and stuff, if you remember that. And we'd go like 90 minutes and like we're supposed to be studying something, but what we're doing is, I'm using you as a group to kind of maybe even help the congregation understand. So I don't even know what we're voting on per se on Sunday. I need to find that out, or May the 5th. I need to find that out. Is the ballot basically saying stay the traditional route, or is it explore one of these other options and keep the congregation updated on it? Well, then you've got the problem of, well, who explores it? The call committee's job is to call via the traditional route. Do you convert the call committee into a different kind of committee now, and they have to relearn all this? I mean, it can get messy, and I don't think it's not automatic to just tell the call committee what we asked you to do. We're now asking you to do something else. So
with the SMP, if it has to come from the congregation, what if there's nobody in the congregation that wants to take the call?
The only reason we're talking about it is there is somebody interested.
Okay.
Right. There is somebody that's interested. And I'm not saying the name because at the moment we're just so early, whether congregate, because if I came up and said there's somebody interested, what do you want? And then, then once again, I'm driving this it's fine. I really appreciate that people care what I think and that they trust what I think, right? And they care about me, and I understand where all that's coming from. But at the same time, together, the collective wisdom and counsel is better than me making decisions by myself at this point. And I'll tell you, because the congregation extends the call. And at any moment in time, just like January 19th with that stroke, had that stroke gone a different route, you can imagine, I don't want the congregation, I want the congregation to depend on pastoral ministry from me as the Lord has given it to do it. But I don't want them to be so unable to function if the pastor dies or they have to get a new pastor. or whatnot. I think the congregation needs to be a higher level functioning in terms of, hey, what do we, what do you want to do? Well, I think we need to be reaching our community. Well, how do you want to do that? I don't know. How do we want to do that? Right. This is kind of the message, do we want to spend a lot of money and time trying to connect to our preschool families, which are high hanging fruit, right? Because they're already extended in debt and have super different priorities than going to church every Sunday. And they tend to gravitate to big churches where they can come in when they want and disappear when they want, and nobody even knows, right? And I'm not saying that's true of all of them. Obviously, it's not. Do we want to reach out to our impoverished communities around us? Remember, we talked about before COVID hit, Love Lorraine. How do we cherish our impoverished communities that are filled with people that Jesus loves and cherishes? And we have, they're on both sides of us, right? So you got to go a little further to the east to get to Cleveland. But there are impoverished people in all of our communities, including Avon. And then, or do we want to reach out with Hispanics, since we have some Hispanics, and learn to build a Hispanic community? And what's that going to be? But whatever those conversations are, if we are coming up with ideas and we do the work, it's fine. When the congregation comes up with ideas and then they look at me like, how are you going to make that all happen? I want to run, right? And no, I'm just saying, yeah.
I think if we're going to, what is the ballot on Sunday?
No.
May the 5th.
Well, what is going on this Sunday?
Well, here's my question before.
No, because
I need to ask you.
So what happened was, when they scheduled the meeting Sunday, I was under the impression the next meeting was going to be the following Sunday in the evening. And I said, I'm not coming to that because it's my anniversary. I'll be at Nemo's. Right? And they go, oh, you don't need to be there anyway. But then somewhere along the line, it got moved to noon on the 21st.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I didn't even know. And then after the meeting Sunday evening, they said, no, it's not even that. It's May the 5th. Okay. So I wasn't even, those dates just kind of flung around. I think what happened was the church was maneuvering, realizing, I think we're going to need more time.
Yeah, and you know what I think they need to do? If you can pass it on or tell me who to, oh, you're here. I think they need to let us see what's going to be on the ballot.
Oh, I know. They're going to do that. And they're supposed to.
And have a write-in with several lines to also say.
They're supposed to. I don't know what's going to be on the ballot. I totally agree with that. I wouldn't even go to a meeting if I didn't. I wouldn't go to a meeting to vote on something. I would want to know what's on the ballot. And the other thing is, I think we're going to need to further define these options, and not simplify it in the sense of dumbing it down, but
making it clear.
If we go traditional route,
we need commitment.
We're going to be asking you for a lot of money.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of money, and we're going to be asking for that money perpetually, right? So it's not like a building. Well, once it's paid off, I get to keep all my money and just give my regular one. We'd be asking for the congregation to give more. And you know what? Over time, I do think the potential for growth is here. Yes. I mean, we grow when we don't try. So the potential's here. I think conservative churches are going to draw people leaving other denominations that aren't conservative. They're going to want to come and find a place. And so I think we have become a little bit that kind of place here.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said. And I think that on a ballot, just as you vote for levies, they need to give you a description. This is what, like you just said, but also to very clearly make the distinction between those three alternatives that we talked about, not in paragraphs, but elements of what this means.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's interesting about colloquy. So my experience with those seeking colloquy in our denomination has been super positive. Because what I have seen is I've seen Missouri Synod theology without Missouri Synod history. Mm-hmm. I was marinated in this. You know, so I don't know what it's like to be outside of it. So, but when I see these men come from outside and they're already reading the documents, they're already studying and everything, they're able to communicate it in a way that I think's very powerful, especially since they're communicating it in a non-Lutheran world. In the olden days, we had enough Lutherans; we didn't have to care about the non-Lutheran world. Now we're intermingled, and we're thinking of church differently than they did in Lutheranism in the 70s or the 80s or whatever. So, and then the other neat thing about colloquy is they are often in these other denominations, depending on the denomination, equally trained. So they have done the rigorous work of a master's of divinity already. So it's super positive there. And have the aptitude to function and communicate in a greater world perspective. That's what I think colloquy brings. S&P gives you a worker who's probably going to be a workhorse and a work in progress, right? So how do you get good at preaching? Not going to classes on preaching, though that's necessary, but by doing it, right? And it's easy because every new preacher thinks that I'm going to preach a great sermon. Well, if you do, good for you, and it will happen. But the hard part is preaching every week. That's what makes it hard, right? Is doing it over and over and over again, and that's where it shapes and forms you as a pastor. And then over time, like I'm preaching Good Shepherd Sunday, and I'm like, wow, this stuff is radically different than anything I ever preached before. Same doctrine. I'm going to do the same doctrine, Jesus Good Shepherd, right? There's nothing fancy or new, but my own growth and experiences and health issues and all that have completely kind of broke open the concept of what kind of shepherd do I have? Well, better than the one that he's a better shepherd of me than I am of myself, right? And so that's kind of a neat way to think about it. So, and then the traditional route is great. It's just out of the box. My greatest concern is to protect the future worker. I don't really think the way forward is by spending down our savings. If we do it 1, 2, 3 years, I'm fine. But the minute we're cash strapped and we hit another pandemic or another thing like that, we're not going to weather the storm. The money in the bank we're not saving it so that when Jesus comes, we get more salvation because we had more money in our bank. It's just cash flow. You might know this as a business person. You got to have a certain amount of cash flow to survive. And as the city possibly puts a school in there, we might have to put sidewalks there and there and there and over there. And I mean, we didn't plan on that, but it could get pricey.
What I was going to ask then, on the ballot or prior to, can you break down in percentage the cost of each of the three? The difference, is it going to be that major of a difference?
So what's interesting, if we call a colloquy pastor, they're likely coming in as a full-time pastor. Okay. There's not going to be any difference between the traditional or the colloquy in terms of cost.
Okay.
None.
No, the other.
Right. S&P, that one, because the person's a worker priest and has maybe health care with their full-time employment, that can vary from person to person and what we're asking them to do.
But in general, say they don't have health insurance with their employer. Because I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think
could be a major savings, or is it not?
Well, if they have health care with their employer, it's a major savings because I think it's about 30-some thousand per church worker for insurance. And that includes the other things, the pension and things that go along with it. And I think that's appropriate that the workers get that.
But that's why I'm wondering.
Yeah, and so, hey, well, here's a question. Let's say that you get a worker priest and then all of a sudden he decides that he wants to be full-time and transition out of his employer. Well, now we're, like you said, now we're in a situation where we would say, well, we can't do that.
Right.
The money doesn't support that.
Just basically, what's the difference in those three as far as our putting out salary, benefit, and all of that, because it's important, I think, that the savings be significant.
Yeah, like if like let's say that I have a person right now coming up out of the congregation. They're going to continue working full time. They have insurance with their current employer. Then all the church is doing is stipend or diminishing the cost of school. And then we as a church would decide, well, this person's receiving the education. Do they have a responsibility to pay a certain amount? Like, for instance, when I went to college and seminary, I paid for my education, right?
Mhm.
And the church didn't pay for it. Now, there were things and helps along the way, but I paid for my own education. Does this worker pay for their own education and then we stipend them when they work, right?
But
Well, and
you know,
really-
the other, I'm sorry. The
Okay,
other
that's
side,
a
though,
good
I
thing.
think by having, because Pastor, you know, and I'm sure they call me or whomever else, the board members, people who've been here for many, many years, my wife and I are always gone, is that you know what additional programs
I
that
don't
can
know.
be- well, okay. Or
Yeah.
what are the needs of the congregation if we had another pastor? Will that help them more involved with the congregation, maybe on a personal matter? The word gets out to the
Yeah.
community, other places about how helpful that church has been to me, to our family, you know, and then I could see it's like any business. You start seeing an increase in the membership.
But the reality is
We're
we
talking about
don't
voting.
we
Well, I
don't
understand
yeah,
the
we
voting.
don't
But
actually
what I'm
know.
saying is-
Yeah. We don't have that. I said that to you Sunday. We don't have that. You want a church to be able to say, well, it's obvious what our way forward is and where we're trying to go. We don't have that. I think we've been excellent in some ways at being a church.
Mhm.
And is that good enough? Well, I mean, it's been good enough for all these years. We're a church.
But
We're
you
an
have- what I'm
authentic
saying
and
is having time.
we're an authentic
out
and
and-
genuine congregation who tends to have a good pastor who looks out after his sheep, makes visits, even goes beyond, preaches solid, a lot of education responsibilities, some outreach, not a lot, some outreach, a high quality preschool, but a tiny little rope bridge. There's not a lot of people going back and forth. And one of the things that we've been asking the congregation is, you know, if we're going to go forward, what is it our congregation could do? Do we want to create a seniors ministry? Right? We just got a men's ministry. That seems to have met a need.
How much does that cost?
Nothing.
Okay.
We, you know, but thinking about all these different things, I think the congregation has to dream a little bit of the dreams. They can't just come from the pastor or the board. I know for a fact our board doesn't know where we're going.
Well, that's what I mean. 'Cause
They
the
don't.
Individual
We need to
mem-
identify
the
that.
individual
I'm sorry.
members
We
of
need to identify
Well,
that.
you can have
it's the
a vision.
individual members of the congregation themselves really feel that this church is really what I need, you know.
That's what
And
that
they tell their friends who
Yeah.
are maybe not members.
Well, remember, we
And
filled
that-
out
that
a
really-
survey recently, right? So the congregation filled out a survey before the call process started saying what they believe the identified needs were in the congregation that a second worker could help with.
Okay.
But it seems like the focus out loud, I'm not saying entirely, is focused on what makes my life easier, right? And I'm not really, you know what's interesting is I'm not really looking for doing less. So don't misunderstand me. I'd like to do
Well,
more.
why you do more, though?
I would like to do more of what I'm good at and less of what I'm not good at. Yes, I would like to do that, but I'm not really looking for a part-time job with a full-time salary. What I'm looking for is to add somebody in so that the church and the ministry grow.
Well, that's what
And
I'm saying.
as we do that, one of the things I've been saying to the church is we talk about every member, in a sense, should be contributing financially and in terms of works of service, either in a ministry or as leaders of a ministry. We got grief share being worked here. Craig's helping me with confirmation, and many of you are doing other things. That's the congregation that's going to weather the storms. And not only that, as we're active in giving, both of time and resources, and we're knit together as a flock of Jesus, one of them, there's many of them, then we also need to say, well, where are the open doors of opportunity in our community that we could meet because of uniquely who we are? And this is what the district's trying to invite us towards. It's called reimagining, which I'm not a big fan of the names. It doesn't matter what their names. Reimagining, what are we, Disneyland? I don't, welcome to the magical kingdom. It's not about imagination.
I think
Yeah.
what everybody needs to know, and real quick,
We don't know what that is. And vision work is two different ways. In the history of the church, there was a movement where vision was congregational driven, based on meeting needs in the community. Then it shifted for a little while, even here, to what does the pastor want? Okay, so the pastor has the vision. You don't have to know what the vision is. He's going to tell you. So the pastor-driven vision, and they're like, well, you're like Moses and you're leading Israel, and you know what God wants you to do, and then you tell the people what we're supposed to do, and then they do the work.
It's like a Venn diagram. You could do that.
Yeah.
You know, congregation, pastor, and where we come to meet in the middle. But my main question, and I'm sorry, but I don't think it was answered. With the alternative of having an SMP, would the financial, say they don't have a job outside, and if, would that be like a determining factor? Oh, you work, so you got it.
Well, sure.
Well, what I'm saying, but maybe they're not the same quality as the person who would probably want to give,
Well, okay.
But
So if you
need to
get
know
SMP, what you're doing is you're making a commitment to the diamond in the rough. You know that ministry and training and seminary education is going to cut that diamond. But first you got to dig it out, and we got to break off all the other stuff, and you've got to let experience do its job. Right.
You have to pay them an appropriate salary.
But I'm making a comment about the quality of it. Right. So the quality comes over time, just like it does with most pastors. There's a few that are rock stars from the very beginning. They're just like savants, but most of us get better over time and experience. But yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
But I am
Okay.
interrupting. And I thank you. This has been so educational.
All right, Margaret.
And
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't get. I thought we'd have time, but I knew this is what I'm saying. We need a lot more time to process this stuff.
This is what the congregation. This kind of discussion at the congregation.
Fred.
Should have been done before you guys were called, in my opinion.
Well, we
All
did.
of this should have been done before.
This is I'll tell you where that's not entirely true. The change of course is financial. So it's the call committee did exactly what we asked them to do. The congregation, in terms of its giving, did not go according to projection. That's what changed and unsettled this.
And that's not what I was saying.
So no, I'm just saying that what changed, the reason why we never told them about SMP or anything was because we were confident the trend was going to go this way. The trend did not go this way. And therefore we thought it was responsible to communicate to the congregation that the trend did not support our way forward. Okay. And therefore we thought it was nice to say to the congregation, because this way forward, which we clearly were going, doesn't look like it's doable at this moment in time. What are the other avenues that we had? And that's what drove it, because we never made a commitment to alternate routes.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but I think whenever you go into something of this magnitude, you think there would be a contingency plan. And as a parishioner, I felt that no criticism, but I felt that the questionnaire was very broad. Mm-hmm. You could not answer it one way or the other. Some of it wasn't even relevant, I thought. So, you get a questionnaire to a congregation that doesn't even know what your plan is. you have to have meetings, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, and
Yeah.
I apologize in advance if
Well, I think the way this church works, and maybe it's not working, is that when you say, here's the people that are delegated this responsibility, then the congregation either goes to those people or they don't. And I think it's a little odd. If I have a question, am I going to walk up to a random committee of people and ask a question? I may or may not. But that dialogue between the call committee and the congregation probably wasn't enough, right?
It works both
Yeah.
ways, communication.
Correct.
And also
Yeah,
we're
it
going
should
to-
start at the congregational level.
I'm sorry,
Hey, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log off here. So hey, thank you all for watching this, but there's going to be some follow-up conversation. And if any of you there that are listening at home have any input or want to talk, I would say the call committee is unfortunately at the moment, because of this, I'm going to tell you something. The call committee can only do that which the governing board authorized it to do on behalf of the congregation. Now that we're changing, the call committee is either off the hook or on the hook to completely revamp what they were doing. So there was no way to have a contingency plan in this scenario because our plan forward was one way. We were going in one direction, and we were going with one set of when the matrix came and told us the numbers don't support this plan of action, then we had to modify.
Yeah, I understand what
And it
you're
would have
saying.
been nice if we were high functioning enough to say that here's plan A, B, and C, but we didn't have that.
See, I think that's a good plan in the future.
But here's why you can't have, you cannot talk about S&P if you don't have someone, unless, you know what, here's what I've done over the years. Even to people in this room, I'm not going to point you out, but I've said to them, hey, you ever thought about doing pastoral things, right? What I was doing is throwing it out. Would you ever consider being a specialized ministry program pastor? And most of the time I don't get a response. And I take that as, well, that's the right response. Not everybody's ready to do that or willing to do it or even, but every once in a while, if you pitch it out there and then somebody comes back and they know more about it than you do, you're like, okay, well, this went different than the last time. There's been a few people that I'll pitch the idea out and they'll come back and say, well, what does it pay? And that's interesting, but it's not the first question.
No.
So I'm always like, okay, maybe there's a financial need that person's not going to be able to step away from a career or something like that. And that's the right answer. But every once in a while, if you get an answer back saying, I want to do it, then I think the congregation for the first time needs to consider S&P.
Oh, right.
Because you have to have a worker. And up until recently, we did not have this. Now we have somebody interested, but we have to go through this whole process to help them discern, because they could discern wrong, right? We have to see what God's will is, and then we have to, as a congregation, match that with what we believe our needs are, and that's a part of the problem we don't always know either.
There's
All right.
variables within variables.